What's going on, guys? Master Turkey here. So we're going to try checking out RPCS3, as in the PlayStation 3 emulator for Windows PC. I will put a link to this website in the description. It's just rpcs3.net. It's an open source PlayStation 3 emulator. RPCS3 is an experimental open source PlayStation 3 emulator and debugger written in C++ for Windows and Linux. RPCS3 started development in May of 2011 by its founders DH and Hakim. The emulator is currently capable of running over 1,800 commercial titles powered by Vulkan and OpenGL. So we're going to go ahead and download this and go over the basics of setting this up. Now you're going to want to choose Windows or Linux here. I am on Windows, so we'll be downloading the 64-bit version of Windows, but choose your flavor according to the flavor of your OS. Go ahead and extract this to the folder of your choosing, and then we'll go over how to get the firmware needed to install the firmware. Okay, so now we have RPCS3 extracted onto our computer. Go ahead and open it up now. Now you're going to want to read the quick start guide, period. A lot of these questions I'm getting on YouTube, the quick start guide would pretty much eliminate all the questions that people have been asking. We're going to go over some of that in this video, but you're still going to want to read the quick start guide. Okay, so before you can use RPCS3, you need Sony's official firmware for the PS3. So let's go ahead and navigate to the website to get that, download it, and then I'll show you how to install it. So I'm literally going to get this from PlayStation.com itself. If you have problems finding this, go ahead and Google PS3 4.82 system software update. I'd advise you get it from a reputable source. I'm going to get it directly from Sony themselves. So now we've downloaded the PS3 updat.pup file. We're going to go ahead and put that in the folder of RPCS3. You don't have to do this. I'm just going to do this out of convenience. Okay, so now we're back in RPCS3. We're going to go ahead and install that system software. Go ahead and go to File, Install Firmware. Choose the PS3 updat.pup and click Open. Just go ahead and let it compile all these PPU modules. Okay, so now it's done loading all of those PPU modules. Okay, so now we're going to install games. So let's go over where to put the games. You're going to want to be in the dev_hdd0 folder. That's interesting. Okay, so they've started putting a disk folder in there. In the past, I always had to create it myself, so I kind of dig that. And if you're installing a PSN, PKG, or a folder that you've already installed on the PS3 that's a PSN game, you will be putting it in the game folder. So again, if you don't have a custom firmware PS3 and you're not installing the PSN PKG files on the PS3 first, you're not going to be putting anything in the game folder. You're going to be installing the PKGs directly through RPCS3, but we'll go over that in a second. For the rest of us who dump our games using a PS3 and an actual physical Blu-ray PS3 disc, we are going to put those games in the disc folder. So I'm going to go ahead and transfer all the games that I had in my previous version of RPCS3 to this newest version. Okay, so now you see that all the games have popped up in the list. Has our compatibility list here. It looks like even the titles that I've submitted that have had nothing written on them. Nice. Like Dungeon Siege 3, I tested that and submitted that, and it's now in-game on the compatibility list. Thank you and shout out to the YouTube user who told me I should start submitting those games. So I showed you how to transfer the disc games and where to put them. However, some of you won't be using Blu-ray discs. Maybe you're using PSN packages. And if you're using PSN packages, the PKGs themselves, and you're wondering how to install them, you're going to be going up to File, Install PKG. I'm going to go ahead and stop this video really quick, snag a PKG file so that I can show you how to install it. Okay, as you can see, we have two PKG files now, the Voltron Defender of the Universe package and the X-Men the arcade game package. We're going to go ahead and go into RPCS3 and show you how to install these. We're just going to go up to File, Install PKG, select the PKG, and click Open. RPCS3 is now installing the package file. Okay, so there's Voltron Defender of the Universe. It's the demo. We're going to install the other one just to show you how easy it is again. And there's X-Men the arcade game. So that's how you'll be installing PKG files. They will install into the game folder. If you need to tweak with that or you want to know where it puts them in the game folder. Your discs are going to go in discs. Your PSN PKGs are going to install into the game folder. Again, if you have a PS3, custom firmware PS3, and you're installing the PKGs on your PS3 first, you'll be transferring that game data directly to the game folder of PS3. However, I have my doubts that many people will be doing that. Quite a few of you are most likely just going to be using the emulator itself to install the packages. So now you know where to put the discs and how to install packages. Let's go over a little bit about the configuration menu. I don't know a whole hell of a lot about this, but we're going to go over a little bit of it. Real quick, if you're not selecting a game and you go up to configuration, this is going to be setting the configuration for the entire emulator. If you select a single game and then go to configuration or right click and go to configuration, this will just be showing the settings. As you can see, it says there for Drake's Fortune. Okay? But if we don't select anything and we click off of it and go to configuration, you can see settings doesn't have anything there. That's because now we're changing the whole settings of the emulator. This is great if you want the emulator itself to just continue loading the OpenGL or just Vulkan if that's what you want to test in or that's what you want it to only run in. But then you can go ahead and dive into titles individually to tweak them with the settings. You'll be either clicking on it, then going back to configuration, or right-clicking on it and going to configuration to change the settings. Because more often than not, most of the games are going to have different settings that they run better in. One might run better in OpenGL, one might run better in Vulkan, one might not run at all except in just OpenGL with certain things attached. So we're going to go over a little bit of the configuration, but I'm not going to go over a whole hell of a lot. I am not a developer or coder at all. If I was, I'd probably be making a lot more money. Now, in the far right, you have the emulator. This has resizing the game window on boot. It also has showing trophy pop-ups. I usually used to unclick the show trophy pop-ups just because it was annoying and sometimes it would affect the gameplay in the emulator, but I'm seeing that it's not having such an effect on the games, so I'm actually starting to leave these trophy pop-ups on because it does kind of look cool in the emulator. Your network, you're going to want to remain disconnected just because really there isn't any network support with it yet. I think it even says leave as disconnected unless you're debugging. RPCS3 has no online support. So you're going to leave this disconnected. System, it comes defaulted with Japanese. I have no idea why, but if you're using RPCS3, you're going to want to change the whole emulator itself, again, by not selecting a game, going to settings, then going to system, and selecting the appropriate language pack for your country or your region. Maybe you're from America, maybe you're from the UK, maybe you're from Russia. You're going to want to change the console language to whatever language that you speak. That way it's a little easier for you to understand. I've actually booted up some games and been prompted with, Japanese characters, and I can't, unfortunately, read Japanese, so you're going to want to change that to the language of your choice. For I/O, you're going to want to leave all of this stuff pretty much default. The camera input, I have messed with the camera input in the past to get certain games past a certain point that use the iToy camera, but you're still going to want to just leave this alone since there is no support for the Move or PlayStation Eye stuff just yet. Audio, it's defaults to X Audio 2, down mix to stereo. Sometimes I turn this off entirely by going to null, because sometimes the audio is just that bad. I'll mute it in the videos and put music over it, or just turn the speakers down themselves because it's clicking or popping and it just sounds atrocious. Sometimes I just turn that to null. I know in the past some emulators have run better with this on null. It doesn't seem to affect it much, but if you want to just mute the audio altogether, you're going to want to put that on null. I would just suggest leaving it alone and leaving it at X Audio 2. Now here's where things get a little more interesting. Your renderer. Your renderer is going to be how it's rendering it, right? That's your API. Okay? OpenGL in this case. Or Vulkan. You don't want this to be on null. I know someone says to put it on null. Null means you have no renderer. I don't know what would be rendering it then. You need something to render it. Null would be no rendering. Maybe you're just debugging and you want to see what the log file looks like. I don't know why you would put that on null, to be honest. And that was one of the questions that somebody asked, so please pay attention to this. I don't know a whole hell of a whole lot, but I can tell you that you're going to want to choose either OpenGL or Vulkan. OpenGL is an open source graphics API, okay, that's been superseded by Vulkan, right? Vulkan is now the new open source graphics, right? Head-speared by AMD, I believe. I could be completely wrong. Some games that use Vulkan that run really freaking well are Doom. The newest Doom runs excellent with Vulkan, getting great FPS bumps on that. So Vulkan will run faster because it's the latest version of OpenGL basically. Vulkan is the successor to OpenGL, but OpenGL is going to have better compatibility. So if you're starting out, just leave it on OpenGL. You know, see how it plays, and then if it's looking like it's handling it pretty well, or you just want to try Vulkan, then try Vulkan. Okay, Vulkan is the faster renderer. OpenGL is the most accurate renderer. If unsure, use Vulkan. Should you have any compatibility issues, fall back to OpenGL. DirectX is depreciated and should never be used. Okay, so basically the description pretty much just said what I already said. I should have just read the description to begin with. I personally just leave the program itself to default to OpenGL, and then if it runs in OpenGL, cool, I'll try it in Vulkan to see if it runs any faster. Okay, so the graphics device is just for multi GPU systems. That way you can select which GPU to use. OpenGL is already going to default to using your graphics card, whatever you have, whereas Vulkan will allow you to select multiple GPUs. I don't have multiple GPUs, so it's going to just default to 1080. Then you have your aspect ratio. 16:9 is widescreen, right? 4:3 is standard. Auto is just going to automatically select it. It's more than likely that it's going to get the data from the game itself, and then that will dictate whether or not to go in widescreen or standard. I just leave it at 16:9. Your anisotropic filter. Higher values increase sharpness of textures on sloped surfaces at the cost of GPU resources, meaning that it's going to go slower if you have not so great hardware. Modern GPUs can handle this setting just fine, even at 16x. Keep this on automatic if you want to use the original setting by a real PS3. Now I can crank that up to 16. It kind of starts to blur things out, certain things out. So I usually just leave that at auto unless I'm trying to see if it makes it look a little bit better. Then you have your frame limit. This should be pretty obvious, pretty straightforward. The only time you're going to use the frame limiter is if it's running ridiculously well. Certain fighting games, Persona 4 Ultimax or Persona 4 Arena Ultimax, I did need to set the frame limit on that to 60 or 59.94 because it was running at like 100 to 200 frames per second. So you won't be using the frame limiter much. I would just leave this on off unless the game is going way too freaking fast. Bomberman, I think Bomberman was also another one that went way too fast. So if things are going way too fast, X-Men the arcade, the PKG we just installed, that goes way too fast, then you're going to want to use the frame limiter and put that on something like 60 or 30. Now you have your default resolution. You're going to want to leave this at 720p. You can mess with that if you want, but again, it is recommended to just leave it at the 720, and then you can change the resolution scale as you see fit. I'll go ahead and read the description. This setting will be ignored if the resolution scale is set to anything other than 100%. Leave this on 1280 by 720. Every PS3 game is compatible with this resolution. Only use 1920 by 1080 if the game supports it. Rarely do emulation bugs. Some games will only render at low resolutions like 480p. So, and you can see in the emulator itself what the supported resolutions are. Like you see wet. Wet only has a supported resolution of 720p. So if you're changing that default resolution to 1080p, you might not be able to run that game, right? So just leave it at 720. A lot of the videos you see online boasting the 4K graphics, what they're doing is they're changing this resolution scale to 300%. That will give you 4K resolution scale. It'll make things look a shit ton better. However, I just leave this at 720 just to see if I can get the game running. If it runs great, then awesome. I will crank that resolution scale up and it makes the game look 10 times better. Then you have your resolution scale threshold. Only frame buffers greater than this size will be upscaled. Increasing this value might fix problems with missing graphics when upscaling, especially when right color buffer is enabled. Do not touch this setting as if you are unsure. Now things like Demon Souls, and I believe there's like 1 or 2 other games that require this, you'll be, selecting right color buffers, and then you'll be changing this resolution scale threshold up or down. So your additional settings are right color buffers. Enable this option if you are missing graphics or broken lighting in game. Yeah, see, required for Demon Souls. Use GPU texture scaling. Small to significant performance boost in some games with rarely side effects. May cause texture corruption in rare cases. There are some cases, I must admit, where unclicking the use GPU texture scaling has helped quite a bit. Very rarely though. Strict rendering mode. Enforces strict compliance to the API specification, might result in degraded performance in some games, can resolve rare cases of missing graphics or flickering. If unsure, don't use this option. There have been quite a few times that I've used strict rendering mode to get things to render properly, or even just get past certain screens in the intro or the menu or certain parts of games. I've had to use that strict rendering mode. It seems to me like that has had quite a significant difference in certain things with compatibility. I have never used VSync. VSync syncs the game to the monitor refresh rate. This is most likely not something that you're going to be using as a computer user. You should have probably 60, 100, 120, 144, or even higher than that refresh rate. My monitor is 100 on the refresh rate, so I'm limited to 100 frames per second. But you're not going to get many games that are even going to hit your refresh rate, so what's the point? And I don't want to put my refresh rate at like 30 or 15, and the frames per second are so all over the place. You get sometimes between 6 to 15, and then other spots it's rendering at 30 frames per second. So this is not something I would suggest doing. But again, the description says by having this off, you might obtain a higher frame rate at the cost of tearing artifacts in the game. Stretch to the display area. Overrides the aspect ratio and stretches the image to the full display area. This works great for ultra widescreen monitors, but sometimes has some compatibility issues. Disable the vertex catch. Disabling the vertex catch might resolve missing or flickering graphics output, may degrade performance. Now, again, this is one of those rare things that gets used sometimes to get certain things in game. Now, under CPU, you've got your PPU decoder and your SPU decoder, okay? Interpreter is going to be precise but very slow. Interpreter fast is going to be a little bit faster than your precise. Rarely does it need this, but only use this if your PPU recompiler is failing. LVM recompiler recompiles the game executable once before running it for the first time. This is by far the fastest option and should always be used. Should you face compatibility issues, which you face all the time, fall back to one of the interpreters and retry. Then you have your SPU decoder, you have your interpreter, which is precise, your interpreter, which is faster than the precise, and then you have your ASMJIT recompiler, that's your fastest. And your LLVM recompiler doesn't exist yet. When that happens, we're probably going to see some significant changes in everything with RPCS3. Then you have your preferred SPU threads. You're rarely going to be changing this. It's more than likely you're just going to leave this on auto. But some SPU stages are sensitive to race conditions, and allowing a limited number at a time helps alleviate performance stalls. Setting this to a smaller value might improve performance and reduce stuttering in some games. Leave this on auto if performance is negatively affected when setting a small value. I always just try 1. If 1 doesn't do anything or negatively affects it, then just go back to auto. But you can choose more than 1. You can get 3 SPU threads at a time, 4 SPU threads at a time. You may need to use that for games like Demon's Souls. Then you have your firmware settings. Automatically load required libraries. Manually load selected libraries. Load automatic and manual selection. And then you have your load liblv2 SPRX only. This closely emulates how games can load and unload system module files on a real PlayStation 3. Some games require this. This is the preferred option. I just go ahead and leave that where it is. Sometimes I'll go to automatically load. And it says, while this option works fine in most cases, liblv2 is the preferred option. But most of the time I'm just going to leave this on liblv2 because again it says that's the preferred option. And then you have enable thread scheduler. That is defaulted. Lower SPU thread priority, enable SPU loop detection, and hook static functions. Enabling the thread scheduler will allow RPCS3 to manually schedule physical cores to run specific tasks on instead of letting the OS handle it. Very useful on Windows, especially for AMD Ryzen systems where it can give huge performance gains. Lower SPU thread priority. That's not really going to be for somebody like me for an i7 or a Ryzen system, but it's usually faster on an i3 or R5. That lowers the priority of the SPU threads. Enable SPU loop detection. That comes defaulted. Try to detect loop conditions in SPU kernels and use them as scheduling hints. Improves performance and reduces CPU usage. It does reduce the CPU usage quite a bit. Hook static functions. This allow to hook some functions like memcopy. Replacing them with high-level implementations may do nothing or may break things. It really has not done anything to help or hinder in any of my testing, so I don't know what or when or why you would use that, but again, it is what it is. Let's go over setting up controllers. You're going to go to configuration and pads, and then click configure. That's if you're using a keyboard. If you have a PlayStation 4 controller, you can use the DS4 for Windows or just plug it in. I found that plugging it in works fine. See, and then my PS4 controller is connected via USB directly to my system. Setting it up on Bluetooth is a finicky, pain-in-the-ass process. That is because PlayStation or Sony, in their wonderful wisdom, decided to make their own dongle for some weird reason and decided to make drivers a pain in the ass. You can use DS4 for Windows and a Bluetooth dongle. Some dongles will work, other dongles won't. Make sure that you Google that to see which ones do and which ones don't before you buy one, if that's what you're doing. Otherwise, if you're like me, you can just hook it up using a nice cable, and then when you select DualShock 4, it will go ahead and show up down here under SHLE, DS4 controllers found 1. And then you can go ahead and configure that if you want to change the buttons or just see that it's working. If you look here, see, right? Okay. So I know that my controller is set up and it's working. I'm going to go ahead and click OK now. But if you have like an Xbox controller, or a different controller other than DualShock 4, you'll be using the X input more than likely. So now we've gone over how to install disks, how to install packages, the settings that you need to use, and more importantly, the renderer API that you're not going to leave on null. You're going to either choose Vulkan or OpenGL. Most of you should just be using Vulkan. Vulkan's going to be your fastest renderer. For people who just want to be checking compatibility and go from there, I would suggest trying to start with OpenGL. But we've gone over pretty much everything. We don't want this on null, right? And mostly your default settings are going to already be there and you should be fine. If you have any more questions, concerns, comments, feel free to leave it in the description. I'll go ahead and link the RPCS3 website where you can donate to them, the PS3 update.pup file that you need, and eventually I'll be doing a video of the No Pay Station where you can be getting your PKG files to install with this in the future. Thanks.